Hi, welcome to Jerry Bickle Race Cars. I'm Steve, and I'm going to talk to you about centering device for the rear axle housing and us using a Wishbone on Jerry Bickle race car chassis cars. As I first started working for Jerry and saw the evolution of the Wishbone change over the years, this is the traditional A-frame body of a Wishbone. Two attachment points generally to the chassis of the car, and the one center point to the rear axle housing. This particular Wishbone, in the early days, you had just a piece of female tubing that was generally honed and is still used today, I should say. And you had a male shaft that was just fit and slid inside of there. Sometimes guys, you'd see maybe put a Zert fitting to grease it or just lubricate it, but it was no more than a finished machine tube slide against just a honed piece of tubing. As time went on, or whatever, the high-tech Wishbone, as we called it, we came up with the same concept or the same idea, but inside the female tube we went with a larger OD, which allowed us to have a larger ID, and then here's a cutaway of what you would be looking at inside there. Now the male shaft doesn't just ride against steel tubing, it goes through a series of impregnated Teflon bushings and makes for what I call similar to putting a camshaft in a motor. You get a real nice tight tolerance fit as the male shaft is traveled through the bushings on the Wishbone main A-frame. In doing so, with that particular scenario, you basically create just zero tolerance as far as having any play or movement in the Wishbone. As far as side to side, if you've ever seen a Wishbone on a race car or watched a rear axle housing go through travel using a Wishbone as a centering device over, say, a diagonal link or whatever, not only do you get as the suspension of the car travels up or down, and the Wishbone shaft travels with that in and out of the mainframe, as there would be any body or side roll, the Wishbone tube can turn from right to left, twist, no binding, just the preferred method and way that most any of the chassis builders today use as far as a centering device. It's just that we're trying to take it a step further with offering it with what we call our high-tech and a Wishbone that utilizes bushings for the male shaft to travel in and out of the female tube of the main frame. You then move into the rod ends that are used. We're big on and a distributor for Aurora Rod End Bearing Company. And this particular rod end is a 5/8 right-hand shank with a 1/2 inch hole. As you can see, not just your standard rod end 1/2 inch hole, has like a high misalignment bearing where there's been a step put on each side of the spherical ball of the rod end, thus allowing a greater misalignment angle. Two of these would be installed in your two forward points where it would mount to the chassis, one back at the rear axle housing. I don't have the rear axle housing bracketry sitting here because that's generally welded to the top or bottom of the rear end housing depending on where the Wishbone's located. But what I am showing here is the different bracketry we have for attaching the 2 points of the Wishbone to the chassis. This being the early traditional style, utilizing just flat tabs that would weld off of the rear crossmember and the rod end bolting between those. And now the more widely used one, a billet mount that's notched to the rear crossmember or chassis of the car. And utilizing bolt hardware for the rod end to fit in between. All of these Wishbones are available and shown in our catalog. We have 2 standard dimension wishbones that we make, as well as always offering, if the customer needs something custom that with his dimensions, and we've had people send their existing wishbone in before, we can build one of our high-techs from their particular dimensions and our pattern from their old wishbone. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and give us a call or look us up on the web. We're always here to help.